Welcome, everyone. I am so happy to be here today with you all. My name is Tori Aaron, and I'm a research fellow at the Minnesota Design Center at the University of Minnesota. Thank you again for being here for our Empowering Small Minnesota Communities project webinar. This ESMC project is a community-centered collaboration with the University of Minnesota partners developed to strengthen small communities through the development of resilient infrastructure. And this program support includes developing and strengthening project plans for long-term goals. We lay the groundwork for proposals and funding opportunities at the federal, local, and state levels. We wanted to be able to provide communities involved or interested in ESMC with new and accessible perspectives on resilient infrastructure strategies. And this webinar series aims to give a better sense of possibilities with examples from professional experiences in the field and to help communities that face similar challenges share best practices and innovative solutions. Just to let everyone know, you are welcome to include any questions that you have throughout the presentations in the chat, and we'll get to them at the end during the Q&A. This meeting is also being recorded, and we will send it out in an ESMC webinar email in a couple of weeks. Today, I would like to welcome everyone. I welcome our guest speakers, Benjamin Winchester and Charles Burdick, who are presenting on housing and development in rural communities. We will welcome Benjamin first, who is a rural sociologist at University of Minnesota Extension, Department of Community Development. He has been working both in and for small towns across the Midwest for over 25 years, and he conducts applied research on economic, social, and demographic topics, including rewriting the rural narrative. He received his BA in mathematics and statistics from the University of Minnesota Morris and MS in rural sociology from the University of Missouri Columbia. He was founding employee at the Center for Small Towns, an outreach program at the U of M, Morris, and specializes in community development, demographic analysis, data visualization, and moving communities away from anecdata. So Benjamin, I'm honored to welcome you. We'll go ahead and get started, and then followed by you will be Charles Burdick, and I'll give a brief introduction to him as well after you are ready. So you can go ahead and share your screen.
Yeah, real good. Thanks, Tori. Hi, everybody. My name is Ben Winchester. I'm a rural sociologist with the University of Minnesota Extension. I think you know Extension is like the 4-H people, right? I'm not in 4-H. I am in the Department of Community Development. So in many ways, the research I do and the kind of work we do in Extension changes as our communities change, right? We're well known for our ag, natural resource work. But we also do leadership, civic engagement, community economic work, community economic analysis, and tourism work. So really, we help on all sides of communities, and it's really my pleasure to serve. I love having a job in Extension because I truly believe we have a lot of knowledge here at the university that we need to share. So my undergrad was in math and stats. I'm a data geek. I love data, but most people don't. So I like to basically tell a story with data about what has been happening across rural America. And so I'm going to share my screen here. If you want to turn on your video, please do so. Like I want to feel like I'm talking to somebody sometimes, so I can at least say hello to you all. But I'm going to share my screen. You'll be able to see my face here too. There we go. Hi, everybody. So thank you for that. So really, you'll see the title of my presentation. It starts with rewriting the rural narrative. And kind of the premise of all my life's work has been the narrative that we're using to describe our small towns and rural places is terrible. It's based out of things that might have happened like 100 years ago or 50 years ago, and we rarely have an idea kind of these trends that are happening today. So I'm not going to get knee deep into the rural narrative. I've got research areas around migration, around diverse leadership that we've got, but more recently over the past 10 years, we've been talking about housing, right? Like everybody. And this presentation is a very brief kind of glimpse of the fuller presentation I've got, but it's gone through some transitions over the years. I think early on it was called moving in, moving out, moving over. And then it was retermed the labor shortage. Wait, I think you mean housing shortage, right? And now it's moving in, moving out, moving over, and moving on, because literally the grain of rural from 20 years ago is now the dying of rural. And we're seeing a lot of turnover in our rural communities. So, as a demographer, we want to talk about this. We want to better understand how are groups of people moving through our rural communities. So, this is where, as a rural sociologist, I love to paint this picture of how our rural communities are changing. But on one hand, we have a terrible narrative that there's a brain drain. We lose our kids. True. We live in the middle of nowhere, which doesn't always sound great, right? A sleepy town that was woken up by the tornado that ripped through it, and then you also have stereotypes, like everybody knows one another when you don't. Nobody locks their doors when you do, right? And the lucky few escape. Like that's related to the brain drain, right? Your high school kids graduate and a bunch of them leave, 40 to 60% do. But I'll remind you, the brain drain is not just your fault. Like that happens in urban areas too. Kids have left for decades, for generations. So really, let's talk about who is moving in. And a lot of times I do talk about the brain gain. So we've been doing studies about people moving in to our rural communities, and this has been happening since the 70s. But we've been doing our interviews, focus groups and studies across Minnesota, Nebraska, and Montana. Now we're going to be doing South Dakota for almost 20 years. And we have found a lot out about these people moving into our rural communities. It's not just kids that grew up there and moved away and came back, right? It's a majority of new movers are not from there. And when we ask these new movers, why did you move to your small town? The top reasons people give is simpler pace of life, number one. Number two is safety and security, especially high with people with children and female-headed households. Number three is the low cost of housing. Nowhere in Minnesota in the top 10 was a job. Now, people need to get a job, but it's not the primary motivation that we're finding as to why people are moving into that region. And they also do not select just one place. They select a triangle. I want to live between Painesville and Wilmer and Morris, right? And they draw this huge triangle and start looking around in the region and find a place to live, find a job eventually, but it's not the primary motivation that is bringing them, pulling them in. So we want to call this brain gain. So on one hand, you got a brain drain, right? 18-year-olds are leaving your town. But on the other hand, we got people in their 30s, 40s, and 50s that have consistently been moving into rural America. In fact, 98% of all rural counties in the 90s witnessed a gain in 30 to 49-year-olds. This has slowed now over the past 20 years, and we weren't sure why, but we have some pretty good answers coming up. So really, this has been a long-standing trend, and I would argue right now that if you do have a negative narrative in your community and you truly believe that your community is dying, then why can't I find a home to buy? Like this is a conundrum. How did we end up at this point? So we do use population a lot of times. Our population is going down. You're right. Our population is in free fall in some places, apparently. But I'll remind you that your homes are still full. How can that happen, really, right? So we live in, we'll get to this in just a second here, but we also live in these vast regions now, more so than ever before. So we live in one place, we work in another, and we're calling it the decoupling of home and work. And right, if you've got an industrial recruitment model of economic development, the historical kind of the first wave of economic development is we're going to bring in a business. And then the motivation for migration at that point is the job. Like the only reason people are going to move here is the job. Well, today it's not the job. It is all of these other factors. And we have been decoupling where people live and work for decades. In fact, Dartmouth did these studies among mega regions. And we most recently here in Extension did a study that showed now, for the first time ever in Minnesota history, more people work outside of the county they live in than in. Commuting out of your county boundary is the norm. So now, how do we incentivize our jurisdictions, right? Our county's got to matter. Well, is it okay if you have the home here and the job next door? Like, right? But we've got programs at the state federal level that are incentivizing our counties to do things or our cities to do things without a recognition that no town is a one-stop shop and hasn't been for decades, maybe 100 years, right? We live in these vast regions. So again, we're getting at that narrative about living in the middle of everywhere. We've got placer data, which looks at behaviors now. So on one side, we have jurisdictional data like sales tax data at the county level. And that kind of is important. But at the same time, that's not how people are actually living. So we've got placer data through cell phones that'll tell you how big of a region people live in. So this is how far do people come in to Wadena County to work every day. They're coming up and down I-94. They're coming from all around the place. People don't hit the county boundary and turn around. We are going across these artificial jurisdictions every day. And I'll remind you that your county boundaries were drawn during a time of horse and buggy. They don't reflect modern behaviors at all. So now part of this is really advancing a narrative that we're still here. We live in these vast regions, and it's I call it the middle of everywhere. You put your home in one place, you work in another relationship, and we do these exercises in extension that identify like how far have you gone in the past year to shop and eat out? And it's huge. People are going out an hour away from their home over a year, right? So now we are crossing paths with each other all the time, all the time. So this is part of the platform of narrative that we need to define before we start looking more at some of the housing churn that I believe is existing here. So Hope Williams in Wadena County, she wants to do this. She's like, how do we blur the lines in our campaigns? How do we get away from, incentivizing they have to be here to do it? And is it okay if, you live in Hancock and you're shopping in Benson? That's okay, right? Even if I'm sitting on the Morris Area Chamber Board and they're like, you shouldn't be spending money in Benson because that's not our board, right? How do we do this? That's not how we live. So we live in these vast patterns of relationships. So there is a ton of change coming. And this is now the launch point for this kind of current condition of our housing supply, in my view, and demand in rural America. So really, the demand side is the moving in, the brain gain. There's no shortage of people wanting to move in. In fact, the number one audience you don't hear from today are the massive number of people who are choosing not to come to your town, that are looking at your town, but are unable to come because they can't find a home. So we do know change is coming. In our most rural communities, we're older. The grain of rural, as I mentioned, we've been historically have a larger proportion of older residents than the metropolitan areas. So, even today, 30% of rural homeowners are over the age of 70, and another 45% are baby boomers, like 75 now. And another 45% are like this baby boomer category. Literally, 3/4 of our homes are 1 and 2 people. Baby boomers and older. You wonder why your school enrollments have gone down for 20 years? We have had people move into our rural communities in the 70s, 80s, and 90s that even brought kids. Some had kids, well, mostly they brought kids. And then when those kids graduate, your population continues to go down because the kids are not homeowners. Your homes are still full. And now they've aged and they're starting to get out of the workforce. So now we're in this position where even 15, 20 years ago, we saw the writing on the wall. We're like, you know what? Here's Yellow Medicine County. Here's the age cohorts in 2010. So 2010, we're like, wow, there's the baby boomer bump right there. This is by age, and these are homeowners. I'm not looking at renters here in gold. I'm looking at the maroon, which are homeowners. There's the baby boomer bump. We're like, man, that bump is going to move over in 10 years. And when people get older, they move out of their home. Up to 20 to 30% of seniors, of people over the age of 67, move out of their home after they hit early retirement. So we thought there was going to be a lot of housing hitting the market today. So 2020 rolled around, 2021, and everybody's like, hey, Ben, where's all the housing at? We're like, I don't know. Like, I'm wrong. I don't know where it is. So we've done more research on this. And here is kind of what we had found out is historically in the past, once people hit the age of retirement, so this is home ownership rate on the left here. And as people age, historically, all previous generations would move out of their home up to 30%, not all people, but all previous generations had up to 30% of their residents start moving out of their homes into apartments, condos, smaller, more appropriate housing for people that want less maintenance or whatever that looks like. But today, the generation today, for the past 10, 15 years, are staying in their homes. So now what's the difference between these two lines? All the people who would have moved into your town. Because right now, those people, so this is the model, those people who are on retirement, especially over the past 10 years, they retired, and 20 to 30% of them would prefer to move over into something else, but there's no option for them to move over. So what do? They stay in their 4-bedroom, 2-bath house. So part of this picture is you have no shortage of workforce housing. It's currently occupied by a population that up to 20 to 30% normally would have moved over. So we have seen in Otter Tail County, New London, the moment they put up patio homes, they're sold. The moment they break ground. And what happens then? You move people over. So you remember the title, moving in, moving out, moving over, and moving on. But it's the moving over part that when you get people to move over, it opens up that workforce house. You do not, I'm going to make the argument, you do not have a shortage of workforce housing. You have the wrong people in the wrong homes, especially. So when we examine cohorts of people moving through, not just a big number, like how many workforce homes do you need? And then you don't have them, and we expect to have all these people moving in, and we just need to build more workforce homes. You actually don't. I would argue you just need to build some patio homes, and they've done this, and that opens up that workforce housing for them. But now you get into questions of what condition is that house in, right? Like people are making a choice to spend money on an ever increasing heating bill that then they cannot invest in themselves or their house, right? What happens long term? So now I'm going to get into this kind of critique about where we're at on this change. So this is what happens over the past 10 years. When people just stay in their home, the proportion of older people, here's McLeod County, for example, the proportion of older people just gets bigger. Proportion of people here, or the portion of people here in this middle age range, 45 to 54, they just got older and made the older age ranges get bigger. So, right, in 2010, 45% or 44% of the homes were owned by people 55 and older. And now that's up over 52%. That keeps getting up. So essentially, you've got a finite number of homes in many of our rural communities. And when there's nobody moving out, there's nobody to move in. And as you know, you don't just magically put up a flag and say, we need some new workforce housing, and it appears. It doesn't. So I look at most of our rural communities. A lot of times you have to have a local developer. You can't just, again, right now, homes are built where there's large margins in income. They aren't built for the common good necessarily. You may be the exception in your town, and I hope you are, that you have a local developer that's willing to work with you on these types of things, but it's not the norm. In fact, right now, we have an age in place strategy that's incentivizing people to stay in these 4-bedroom, 3-bath places. So I'm going to critique age in place and say that age in place should not be confused with age in the house. Age in place, when we have done surveys, means age in my town, age in my community. Because right now, when people at the age of 55 to 67, they look over to move over and they got nowhere to move over to, they just stay in their house. But now they have a policy of best intentions, which is I'm going to stay in my house forever. And they make all the modifications of that house and they spend a bunch of money for livability, but that's not an equity builder in that home. And then when they go to move, it's emergency mode. So I will say, seniors intend to stay in their homes. 90% say they want to stay in their homes, but only 43% said it was easy to do so. And why don't they? So AARPs ask people, like, why don't you move? Stress, right? Fear, anxiety, emotional ties, fear. And I get it. I get all this. In fact, so now we're trying to help that. We're going to help people age in their house. We're going to bring them their meals. We're going to take you to your appointments. We're going to ensure that you can still have this life while you stay in that 4-bedroom, 2-bath house that you never go upstairs in. Now, I want to think about when people do have to move, because people do. Just 1 in 5 people end up dying near or in their home. So what happens at the end of life is people do have to move out. When they move out, it's emergency mode. And you thought you had fear and right stress, all these things, stress and fear and anxiety when you were thinking about moving? How about when you actually do and it's emergency mode and it's exacerbated? And I'll tell you what happens here is you don't have choices and you don't have control. I'm like, hey, Christine, I know your mom wants to stay in town, but sorry, there's a waiting list for that place in town. So now she can't live in Hancock here. She's got to move over to Starbuck. And she's like, I don't have any friends there. This is the reality of the situations when we don't have anybody in our towns responsible for all the housing in town. Nobody's responsible. We see housing as a private asset. We have a laissez-faire approach to all our housing in town, except for the Section 8 stuff, which has a huge shining light on it. I want to look at all the housing units. Who's in them? What is the condition of these homes when they are moved out of? So this is the work to be done for me. It's getting past the age in place and thinking about aging in community, but there's an impact here of people making poor decisions. So I do want to talk about the rub here, which is like, why should the public care? Why should the public care about these private assets, right? Because again, laissez-faire approach to this. Well, all right, let's say in our small town, we have 4 houses. Right, you never have 4, but you have 4 houses in town. And every year, those 4 homes bring in $1,000 in property tax revenue. But what if we don't care about all the homes in town? Like my neighbor's house when I lived in Hancock. My house and my neighbor's house was built in the same year, but you wouldn't have known it because I like updated the windows and put on new painted, right? And he had crows living in the eaves, I suppose, but he was on fixed income. There was no way he was doing all the same improvements I was. There was no way. So what happens then if my neighbor's house gets torn down? What are you assessed on? You're assessed on the land and the structure. But if you take the structure down, the county is only going to assess that parcel on the land. And now that land is only bringing in $200 a year as opposed to the 1,000, right? These are very small numbers, but as opposed to $1,000 we got last year. Now, does the county look around and say, sorry, we had to take that house down. We better reduce our levy. by $800 because that house got torn down. They don't reduce their levy. Who pays for the private inaction of one parcel? Everybody else's taxes are going up because of this. So now what is the relationship between a public good and a private asset? I believe we need to advance that conversation in a real way as public officials, especially. You need to answer these questions. Why should you be spending public dollars on any of these things? Why would I spend money keeping Tori's mom's house going? If you do not have somewhere for someone to live, you don't have wealth creation, you don't have leadership, business ownership, like employees. Like this is the conundrum we're in. So I will talk about the continuum of, and when you talk about like senior housing, you have to just talk about, I've learned 55 and older housing. Because if you just talk about senior housing, you think you're going right to continuum of care. And I'm talking about the continuum of life before you get to care, right? And continuum of life housing can still be found in small towns. Once you start advancing up the continuum of care, you're probably going to go to more regional centers where you've got that proximity to the clinic or the pharmacy, all that kind of stuff. So this is where, again, we've seen patio homes being built. The moment they're built, they're sold, and there are people moving in off the farm or people moving in from within town and over. So I want to shift our indicators of success from population to housing units. Housing stocks are a measure of your community wealth. This is how wealth gets created. They're home to individual wealth, but these persist over time. That house is occupied and is a home. It was a home to someone before, it's a home to someone today, and I hope it's going to be a home to someone in the future. So we do know the most rural counties here in Minnesota are experiencing a lot of death. Kelly Ash, we do these studies. Kelly does this with the state of rural, the Center for Rural Policy and Development. And we're showing now, again, I want to paint the picture. That chart, that map here on the bottom right is like the first map I was ever lived in, which was the grain of rural. And of course, like southwestern Minnesota are all part of the Great Plains, all this grain, grain, grain. Well, the grain of rural from 15 years ago is now the dying. And we are seeing this. In Minnesota now, over the past 2 years, the counties with the highest death rate now have the highest in-migration rate. Because not finally, but people, when they pass away, are making room for new people to move in. So what do you have? You're out with 1 and 2 people households and in with 3 to 5. And we are seeing populations go up. We're seeing school enrollments go up. So this is part of a future that I don't want to be Pollyannish about it, but it's like, well, what would happen if 3/4 of your homes turn over? Like do the back of the envelope math. And you have average of 1.6 people in the households before, and now 3.6. What does that really do to your population? What does that do to your school enrollments as we go forward here? So I just want to summarize kind of all this. That again, new family housing for me is rarely an option. And for me, really, our existing stock is our primary asset, but nobody is responsible for all the housing in town. So what can we do around this, especially when we don't have an industry to serve rural communities? You know, we don't have tradespeople. Like we have a shortage of all this stuff. I am a huge proponent of a DIY network. I believe we could build a DIY rural network to help us fix up our homes. So on one side, and yeah, teach people how to do this. And I say this from a very personal experience because I did. I had a house that was built in 1907. I ripped out walls, knob and tube wiring. So when you do rehab in a rural community, you're going to be encountering challenges you may not find in more modern housing, right? So, I mean, I do believe offering courses, right? I'm a true believer that you just need hand holders in life. Like you can change out your outlets, you could be ripping out your lath and plaster and putting up sheetrock, all that kind of stuff. But you just need some coursework in it. Like, you know, Home Depot offers classes or whatever, but through your local lumber yards, all that kind of stuff. I love Habitat for Humanity too, because you can learn how to do flooring and put up sheetrock and all that stuff. But Habitat for Humanity is primarily new builds. Well, when I'm rehabbing my 1907 house, like I had no level floors, I had no 90-degree angles. Like I need to learn how to rehab a non-square home or put down self-leveling concrete to make the floor level again. Like it's different. So I'm a big believer that we could be building community toolboxes, community knowledge, and ensuring that our housing stock is going to be ready for the next generation. Because a lot of times, as one example, the people here are unable to keep up their home. And so what if they're not? And even if the people that are in these homes may be income eligible for home weatherization programs, but they don't take advantage of it. And because nobody in town is like responsible for all the housing, they're not like, hey, Tom, you really should take care of your house. Like we would love to have you take advantage of this program, right? What if you don't take care of it then and you sell the house? Let's say Tom was low income eligible for this home weatherization program, but then Tom moves out And then the people moving in are not income eligible. And now they're having to pay for that insulation, for that windows, for the wire. Like, again, we should be concerned about that infrastructure at this point, but nobody truly is. So I do want to talk about like the talent pipeline. Like anytime I'm in front of high school kids, like let them know, like you could 2 years of schooling and you could be banking it. We need so many electricians, plumbers, construction. So this is just a whole nother avenue, but I believe we could be building a whole community knowledge base out of this, sharing with people. And I'll tell you personally, this comes from a very personal piece for me because my dad passed away when I was 19 and he was a mechanic. He was a woodworker. Like he had a huge garage with all this stuff. I didn't care. I was a screwy little kid, right? I didn't really care about my spending all this time to learn from my dad. Well, then years passed, like not many years after he passed, like I wish I knew how to fix my car. I wish I knew how to rip out these walls, like right. But I ended up finding people around me, and I just called them hand holders. Like mechanic, I knew a guy Lane who lived in Alberta when I worked in Morris at Amoco that he was always a phone call away. If I was ripping out the motor in my Mustang, he was a phone call away. Like building that hand-holding mechanism is important for me and having people because the majority of new movers into our small towns are not from there. So who do you go to when anything happens, when your pipe bursts, any of this kind of stuff, right? So I am a huge advocate that you don't need to be an expert to improve your home. If you guys are familiar with Reddit at all, I started a home improvement sub on there that went from 500 people and now has 4.5 million people on it. And the basic question is we all can help each other just answer basic questions. You have so many people that don't know where the water shutoff is, that don't know how to change out an outlet. These are all achievements we can make in our own lives and help improve the infrastructure of our home. So this is a very personal thing for me, is just like giving the capacity for individuals to do this, especially when we're in a shortage of all these skills. So with that, I do believe we could do some rental thing. You know, you used to have like shops that you could bring in your car and you would have a community toolbox to fix your car in, those kinds of things. I believe these are vital pieces to our way forward to ensure we've got a housing stock. So then I'm going to hit on this labor shortage thing one more time, which is right now you do have a labor shortage. We've got labor shortage everywhere, right? If you truly believe it's a labor shortage, then you're without recognizing there may be a confounding variable here, which is the inability for people to find a home. If you truly believe you have a labor shortage, then you're doing something wrong. Like you're not paying enough, your community is not nice enough. Like, why do we have this labor shortage? We're doing something wrong. People could move there if they wanted to. Like you do that exercise, right? Go to Zillow and pretend like you're getting a job in Clontarf and like, where are you going to live? How long is it going to take you to find a home? So we have found schools that buy a single home that temporary teachers use until their community can actually open up a housing spot for them. This is virtually impossible to welcome people in from a resident recruitment or HR perspective without a connection to a home. But that home may not be in your town, it needs to be in your region. So this is where I'm going to say working regionally is paramount. Get out of your individual single town because we are crossing paths with each other all the time. And I would ask you to engage in a regional community housing succession discussion. Maybe one of the best things you can do for the future of your community is just ensure there's somewhere for people in your region to live. That's all I got for you, folks. Hope we're on time here. It's 12:30. I've got my email right here. If you've ever got any questions, I love presenting this. I'm not even a housing person, folks. I'm just a data person that likes to look at data. So with that, Tori, I'll throw it back to you, and then we'll have questions at the end, right? Or now? Or I haven't been watching chat.
Yes, we
Sorry, folks.
will. Yes,
Okay.
and I can address some of the questions in the chat. Thank you so much for one, your enthusiasm and your inspiring presentation. I would like to next invite Charles Burdick with Streetfront Development. Charles launched Streetfront Development in 2019 to create mainstream commercial buildings for low-income housing, market rate apartments, and luxury condominiums. Excuse me. Um, he had come to this work with a passion for sustainability and is a LEED accredited professional. Thanks so much, Charles. Looking forward to your presentation.
Thanks, Tori. Yeah, with Streetfront, I focus on walkable locations mostly. Um, I'll walk through a case study that I've been working on in Litchfield, Minnesota, but I'm also, based on Ben's presentation, there's one other case study that I'll we'll switch it. We'll adapt a little bit on the fly. I'll show you one other case study that I think ties directly into the setting the stage that Ben set so well. So let me pull up my slide deck here. Okay. Is that showing for everybody?
Great.
Outstate opportunities. So, little introduction on me, the principles that I'm taking to this case study, and then this case study of adaptive reuse in Litchfield. Streetfront development. So I focus on boutique real estate development in walkable locations and try to do it with a community focus. This is 24 apartments built in St. Paul in 2023. This is 15 condominiums that we're looking to start construction on in about a month, break ground on in the Linden Hills neighborhood of Minneapolis. This is a affordable housing project that I consulted on for Sherman Associates in North Minneapolis. And then I'll talk about this, which is a really innovative housing concept from North Country Cooperative Foundation, who's another one of my affordable housing clients. And they're bringing a really interesting model that you might all be interested in. So this is a lot of stuff that Ben really hit on. The housing crisis is statewide. It's in a lot of our communities across Minnesota. There are pockets of good employment. As a developer, I like to look for the pockets of good employment, and there are opportunities. The development and investment community mostly chases projects right in the metro, and the returns are, everybody's chasing the same acreage, and those returns have tightened. I'm able to find a wider, higher return on my outstate projects. But to do that, I have to ditch my metro mindset, which is how I came up in the industry, and my assumptions around permitting, cost basis, financing, construction. I have to take a different approach. Most projects are done all at once. We're going to buy the land. We're going to do a big architectural effort. We're going to engineer it. We're going to get a giant construction loan, and then we're going to build it all at once. And that's how it's going to work. To do this project in Litchfield, I have to do it in an incremental approach. So I take that development process and slice it up and repeat it over and over and over and over again. So Litchfield, Meeker County, an hour and a half roughly west of Minneapolis, beautiful downtown historic Main Street, 1880s, 1890s, two-story Main Street buildings, commercial on the ground floor, office or residential upstairs, and thoroughly walkable, and in the past had everything you could want. These sort of 15-minute communities. It had the grocery store, it had the barber, it had the bank, it had the lawyer's office, it had the department store. And of course, that's still in everybody's memories. But today it's a little different. Here's the streetscape from early 1900s, and here's the streetscape today in that same vantage point. And what we see is a lot of underutilization of the buildings. The property ownership was concentrated amongst a few owners that bought them, let's say in the 70s or 80s, and they held on to them for 40 or 50 years and did very little reinvestment in them. A lot of the activity for new construction and new investment was happening on the outskirts of town. And so all these buildings need some TLC. They need roofs, windows, storefronts, tuck pointing. But they're cherished. I mean, people love them. I'll skip this as just context. Highway 12 comes straight through the heart of Litchfield's downtown. And so the historic area is really these couple of blocks. In 2020, I invested in 4 buildings all on the same block that were largely vacant. The first one I bought was this one, 231. I bought it for $50,000. It was 100% vacant. I also bought the building next door, this 237 building. It was occupied, and so it had rental income. This 225 building was burnt out in 2005. It's been burnt out and vacant for 20 years. Prominent building right on Main Street, huge eyesore, sending a signal like nothing's happening here, boarded up windows. But you can tell it had been beautiful. And then this 217 building has the Independent Review, the local newspaper on the main floor. Of course, the local newspaper had been bought by some private equity firm that was stripping out the real estate. We bought the real estate and negotiated to keep the newspaper in the building. But the second floor had been completely vacant. So really underutilized infrastructure in the main street. And my approach was, hey, Litchfield, it's a county seat. There's a hospital. There's about 5 manufacturing companies that are all always looking for laborers, and the housing crisis is here. If we can wake up these buildings and have some more housing upstairs, that'll help create more activity, and eventually the downstairs will come back to life again. So most of my plan was around financing around those apartments upstairs. What I did was, rather than try to do this all at once with a giant loan, I would use the cash flow generated by this occupied building to renovate one apartment at a time, wake it back up again, lease it up, use the revenue from that apartment and now the cash flow from all of this to renovate another space, and do that over and over and over again, reinvesting each time. And I found that to be much more successful for this kind of model. Vacancy is cancer. So this is really, trying to address that cancer that has metastasized on Main Street and turn it around. And I'm seeing in Litchfield, I'm not the only one reinvesting on their Main Street, and this is starting to have a turnaround effect. And so in 5 or 10 years, I think we will have done a redirection there, which is great. These are not super fancy renovations. This is the before, where it had about 6 different layers of flooring on the ground. It wasn't super attractive. This is the after. We stripped up the flooring. We finished the floor. I didn't address the drop ceiling. We'll do that in a future date. I didn't address the storefront. We'll do that in the future. But now this commercial space is now rented. Great. We're starting to reverse the vacancy cancer. On the alley side, it looked really tired and junky. I put some new siding, some paint, cleaned it up. It's not rocket science. It's just getting that increment better, sending a signal like, hey, we care about this. The apartments upstairs were in really unleasable condition, really terrible condition. Is it fancy? No. Is it Menards materials? Yes. But now it's in leasable condition. Turn it around and incrementally improve it. And of course, small stuff makes a big difference. So putting out plants, cleaning up, getting the trash out, paint, small stuff makes a big difference. So now in 2025, this is the before and this is the after. This on the far right, this building that was occupied was generating $950 a month in revenue. By renovating during turnover times, now it generates $1,900 a month in revenue. This building that had been 100% vacant now has a first floor commercial tenant, and one of the 2 upstairs apartments is renovated. We're still working on the other upstairs apartment. So it went from $0 of revenue to $2,500 of monthly revenue. We just signed a construction contract to start work on this burnt out building. This one is less incremental because it had been burnt out. There's a bunch of structural repairs that need to happen, a new roof, utilities need to be brought back into the building. So this one is a bigger deal. And I used the Southwest Initiative Foundation was able to get a deed Main Street grant. So that helped with this. And then we got some supporting funds from the Meeker EDA. So that is helping with this. But it'll be great to bring this building back to life. It'll be a huge, huge deal. And in this building, the newspaper used to use the entire first floor. They don't need it anymore. We renegotiated their lease down to just a couple offices and then converted the rest of the main floor into an event center. And then upstairs, we're almost done renovating those apartments. So it's exciting, over these 5 years, the annual revenue, has grown. It's not going to keep exponential like this, but this is the model of incremental reinvestment. And the tools I use for these were not super fancy. I took out a HELOC on my personal home to have some working capital. I use it as a line of credit. I advanced some construction funds. When the building is leased up and cash flowing, I put a regular commercial mortgage on that building, and I take the funds back and pay down my HELOC. The city has a facade grant for $8,000 per building. I mentioned those deed Main Street grants. They've been very helpful. And then Representative Erdahl from Litchfield was able to get a state appropriation in 2024. And that program is being designed now, but that'll help facade improvements up and down this historic corridor, which is great. We're looking forward to that. That is a rapid run through of that, but I did want to mention this North Country Cooperative Foundation project as well, just because it's so relevant to what Ben was talking about. Let me see if I can find how to switch. Where did my Zoom controls go? One second.
They may be way at the top.
They may be way at the top. I got to figure out that fancy trick you got, Ben, of how you get your picture on the slides. Let's see. Where did it go? Sorry, I don't know why this is being so difficult.
There, I just
you did
stopped
it.
your
Thank
sharing.
you.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, let me pull up this other slide. Okay, so North Country Cooperative Foundation is one of my affordable housing clients. And they created this concept of a new leaf neighborhood to create some affordable housing options for single family home ownership, identifying exactly this gap that Ben was hinting at. Where are the seniors going to go? There are subsidized apartments. There may be, some Habitat for Humanity homes. Most of the new construction is very expensive, fancy houses on a whole acre lot on the outskirt of town. So where do these 60 to 115% area median income folks find a home, especially if they're looking to be out of their 4-bedroom home and they want something smaller and single level, and also for those workforce families. And so the concept here is to create some new neighborhoods using facility built or factory built homes. So manufactured and modular to address the workforce issue and the economy of scale issue, and then be really choosy about the design of them. A high quality foundation, sided not up on stilts. It's going to be sited at ground level, a front porch facing, really focusing on the neighborhood design, the walkability, kind of getting back to um, a more communal sense of the neighborhood design, and use that as a tool um, to help address this housing demographic mismatch. So we're looking in a couple different communities of doing this. This is one site plan where eventually we would like to do 50 or 60 homes, and we'll do 15 or 20 at a time. But if you're interested in that, contact me. North Country Cooperative Foundation is the main um, organization that's heading this up. I'm providing development consulting assistance. They've got some funding from Fannie Mae, and they've got partnerships with NeighborWorks Home Partners to provide some lending options, and then a bunch of design assistance as well to bring these neighborhoods to life. So that was a rapid run through of a lot of stuff. Hopefully, we've got a few minutes for some questions.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'd like to just invite everyone for the next 10 or 15 minutes to feel free to turn your camera on and unmute if you have a question. And I'm just going to address a few questions that were put in the chat initially. One was when planning a new downtown/Main Street community, would it be realistic to require ground level retail space with upper housing space for future new development? And I believe that question is for Charles.
Yeah. So I uh, I'll put my bias around city planning up front. My bias on city planning is that less rules are better than more rules. So, after we got heavy industry away from housing, um, I don't find much value in FAR. Nobody thinks in FAR except for maybe architects and planners. I don't find much value in a lot of use restrictions. Um, uh, so requiring ground floor retail or requiring housing upstairs, to me, limits your opportunities. I'm much more interested in those main street environments where you have that historical development pattern, that pre-war, pre-car development pattern, then have a different use every 25 to 50 feet to maintain that walkability. That's what creates that walkability. So rather than a block long giant thing that nobody gets, there's nothing new and interesting until I get a block later down the street. That's the part that is most concerning to me as an urbanist that really tries to focus on walkable areas. Would it be bad to have housing on the ground floor? Not necessarily. It depends. I think it can be appropriate even in these historic downtowns to sometimes have housing on the ground floor. Does it have to be housing upstairs? No, not necessarily. Maybe you want to have a dance studio upstairs. Maybe you want to have um, I don't know what, an event center. So I would prefer to focus on maintaining that fabric of the walkable uh, um, context and focus less on the uses.
Thank you. Let's see. I think this one is for Benjamin. How has the end of shop classes in high schools impacted the home repair skill deficit?
Yeah, good question. I know we're in a shortage. I don't think there's been any systematic studies done. I mean, we do have SLEDS data at the state level to kind of study, which degree areas people are going into and then their ability to have jobs in those areas after that. So if anything, like trying to lift up some of those trades just to show either in high school that they're a more than viable option, or at least getting people into those 2-year degree programs too. So I don't really know. There have not been studies. I've been asked that a number of times, just the inability for our schools to support students in that way. So again, that's kind of when I go right to that community toolbox, the community learning centers, get your hands dirty right with your houses that need it right now, in a sense.
And you had touched on this a little bit, Charles, but someone had asked a question about tiny home communities and them being realistic to pursue in developing community housing.
Yeah, I think it can be an interesting tool to have available. I don't think it's gonna be, I don't think it's gonna cure all our ills. I don't know a lot of people that want to live in 150 or 200 square feet, especially those folks that are coming from a four-bedroom house. Um, what we found in designing this Linden Hills condo building, we were designing for that demographic, and we designed 1,600 to 2,400 square foot units so that it was more relatable, felt more comfortable. It's a two-bed plus den, uh, and we got a lot of engagement and response from that empty nester demographic. Uh, at least what we are, this is that is a metro project, not a outstate project, but in that context, that demographic doesn't want to be squeezed down into a one bedroom, in the North Loop. They want to be in something that feels more comfortable and in a neighborhood context where they've got um, neighbors around, community, fun things to do, but not a ton of traffic, a ton of uh, noise. Uh, so finding that right balance.
Fisher, I see you have a couple of questions and comments in the chat. I'm just gonna put you on the spot here.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Tori.
Yeah.
Great presentations, Ben and Charles. I had two questions. One, Charles, is there TIF available for some of the work that you're doing? Because you're clearly generating new tax revenue for the city. And then I wondered if either one of you were aware of the pocket neighborhoods that are going up on the West Coast, which has smaller houses with more shared land, so you can fit more units, greater density, but also create a greater sense of community.
Yeah. So TIF can be a naughty word in some communities outstate. So there are some communities, and Litchfield's one of them, where they have a particular allergy to TIF, which I understand. There are other communities where it is a regular tool in the toolkit. So I think it depends community by community. I do think we are increasing the tax base. And so there's value there. TIF, just like low-income housing tax credits or some of these other tools, lends itself more to that do it all at once financing model rather than incremental improvement. So it can be a helpful tool, absolutely, just depending on what that community's feeling is about it. I do think there is a place for, to your point, Tom, different housing configurations. So the notion of like a cottage court where they're not grand homes, but they are, let's say it in that, I don't know, 1,000 to 2,000 square feet maybe. And they're kind of centered in a U shape around a courtyard. And you could imagine either multi-generational living in that environment or a cooperative of similar folks where, great card night is Tuesday night and they're building that sense of community, or, the barbecue is every Friday, happy hour and barbecue is every Friday. I think that can be a useful thing. It doesn't fit in in a lot of places current zonings. So having zoning that allows for some different configurations can be really helpful.
I'll just chime in here. I just want to reinforce like the household structures that we're going to be moving into don't look like they did in the past. Like this idea of a nuclear household is so 1950s, like I'm only successful when I'm with my wife and kids by myself in our house. Well, like we are returning to multi-generational housing like gangbusters right now, especially as this older generation, and we're bringing in my mom or whatever. How that looks, it is, and I say it's like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Everybody's laying in the same bed, head to foot kind of thing. Not really like that, but what do our structures look like when it's going to be multifamily, when the multi-generational? But it is this shared lodging and shared open space kind of ideas are really out there amongst the younger generations today. So I think right now it's some of the older thoughts are around anytime we talk about bringing people together, live in one place, it's like assisted living. Like, I don't want to go where people are going to die. Like, no, we're not talking about that, especially with the older generation. You have that continuum of life before you get to your continuum of care. So I think there's a framing issue too, just in terms of what that really can mean for you. But the younger generation kind of has it down. They are working together to achieve their, by forced, to achieve their housing solutions, right? But it may become more attractive really as we move forward too. So I just want to hit on that, like the long-term demographic shifts we see in too are pretty interesting. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, I think there's a lot of room for us to become better at sharing in this world. Catherine, go ahead.
Yeah, so this is a question for Benjamin and Charles both. So, first of all, wonderful presentation. So, I was really struck by how the energy community movement overlaps with some of the things you said. So in terms of do it yourself, learning and being, and building and the education that is necessary in small towns for people to do it. Where is that located? Also, the demonstration projects for it that become learning sites. So Charles, and so for both of you, whether it's with high schools or wherever it comes, but Charles, putting solar, for example, on those Main Street building, then you actually have, say, a 20-year stable revenue stream from the solar savings that could be captured and used for some really interesting programming, do-it-yourself education. Do you have examples of that happening, either of you, this combination of education, energy community, and really the ability, this opportunity we have now to keep more benefits, economic benefits local with this energy transition?
So I'll jump in a little bit. Litchfield has municipal utilities and they don't have a solar program yet. So I've looked into that a little bit, but have tackled, sort of first things first. Eventually, I would like to be able, we've got all these flat roofs on these Main Street buildings. It seems like an opportunity for having solar. What we are doing as we're going through those renovations is trying to address obvious insulation, water protection. It's kind of just the basic thermal envelope of those buildings, and the heating and cooling systems to keep them as efficient as we can in that circumstance. Same thing with those factory-built manufactured homes, insisting on a high level of insulation and quality materials. They make those homes out of the same materials that a site builder is making. They're made out of 2x4s or 2x6s. They're using, they're putting a decent amount of insulation in the walls, and many of them are adopting a zero energy ready kind of platform as their basis. So there are some exciting things happening on the energy front as well.
Yeah, I don't really have a lot of answers here. I know the Clean Energy Resource Team has been really great for the University of Minnesota here, and we've got the Regional Sustainable Development Partnerships that we've got across the state as well. So it's really community by community is so different, in terms of where the leadership is, but we do believe that communities can lead and encourage their residents to actually, follow them when they take on some of that leadership capability too. But yeah, I don't have specific examples. I just kind of, the moment I think about energy, I'm at CERTS and Joel Haskard and all the good folks there. So thanks.
Mary Vogel, go for it.
Do either of you have good examples of the integration of childcare facilities with housing? We now have, the family has changed. We have people who are, both parents are in the workforce. So what's happening in Greater Minnesota to address childcare issues in association with housing?
I don't have great examples of that, but I hear that concern a lot. Access to childcare is my kids are now 16 and 13. We're past that age, but man, was it hard when we were in that age. And, so I think there are opportunities to site childcare near housing to help make that a convenient thing. But that's probably more at a city planning and zoning level first, just to make sure that you're not, again, not restricting uses to have the childcare way on one side of town and the housing that's going to use it on the other side of town. Help those be closer together.
Yeah, there's not a ton here. I mean, First Children's Finance have been doing a ton of work across the state here around childcare. We have never not had a childcare shortage, like number one. And so right now there's the ability for us just to open a childcare is solely dependent upon the rate of this in-migration too, which is dependent upon the rate of death at this point. So like we have to wait. Like there is at what point do you hit that critical mass again that you can open a center when you finally got those kids? We are seeing young people move in, or younger generations move in, and they're bringing their kids. They're not always having their kids here. That's one of the bigger differentials. They're bringing in the kids when they're in third, fourth, fifth grade. So that's been a little bit of a lag here too. But we haven't seen that dissuade people from moving in. Like they still move in and figure it out is kind of their quote. Like, we're going to figure it out. Like, so there's no systematic way to study that right now for us that we have anyway. But yes, top of the mind. We've got groups working on it, but it's all hand in hand with the very slow churn of change in our towns. But at least we have people working on it and thinking about it every day. We have an industry here. So thanks, Mary.
Well, I know we're a little past time and I want to be respectful of everyone's, the rest of their day moving forward. There was a great comment in the chat about an MPCA grant that supports reuse and repair and apprenticeship development, which Benjamin, one of your ideas, had mentioned. So I just wanted to mention that if people are interested in seeking more information about it. Thank you so much to Benjamin and Charles for being here today and sharing your knowledge and wisdom. I'm sure we could have gone on for another hour, but I so appreciate it. Tom, go ahead.
I was just clapping, thanking them.
Oh, great.
Yeah. Good
Great.
job,
Thank you,
everyone.
everyone, for
Yeah.
being here.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.